Rethinking legacy resilience around identity compromise and destructive malware. Hi, I'm Tony Gray. When we think about ransomware readiness, most of the conversation revolves around backup hygiene, endpoint visibility, and containment, what I've been calling conventional wisdom. All important, but there's two parts of the recovery story that still catch organizations off guard for both planning and execution: identity and malware that causes intentional destruction of systems. Let's start with what happens when your identity infrastructure gets pulled into the blast radius of an incident. And in many organizations, that identity layer, usually Active Directory, is still tightly coupled to legacy on-prem systems. That's where the recovery challenges really begin. When attackers compromise identity by escalating to domain admin, a similarly broadly privileged domain account that's perhaps tied to IT admin tools, or gain control over your Active Directory environment, it's not just about access. They now own your network. You can reset passwords, change group policies, shut off logging, and disable security tools. In many cases, they also tamper with the backup infrastructure itself, disabling jobs, altering retention, or poisoning what would otherwise be your supposedly immutable recovery lifeline. Now imagine trying to rebuild your environment. You have backups, sure, but the access to those backups is managed in the same domain that's just been compromised. The orchestration tools that manage restores also tied to the same trust model. Your ability to use those backups would be seriously in question. Even basic infrastructure, DNS, DHCP, configuration management, all would be difficult to reestablish if you're relying on domain-joined systems to do it. And it's not rare. In a 2023 report from Covware, more than 60% of enterprise ransomware incidents involve domain admin access before deployment. In other words, identity compromise isn't just a byproduct, it's a precondition. So your challenge is this: do your recovery playbooks assume your identity infrastructure is still intact, or do they include planning for a clean build of Active Directory, offline credentials for backup access, and having admin tools that don't rely on the domain? How isolated are your backup metadata and configurations from day-to-day access, so you're not restoring into the same trust model that just got breached? These may all be open questions for many organizations. One technique for planning might be out-of-band, highly secured emergency accounts with domain-level privileges that can only be enabled by the CIO or CISO. These accounts allow key services to be accessed if AD is down or compromised. You may even be able to disable the compromised domain account by using one of these emergency accounts. Another might be implementation of a tiered admin model that separates administration and identity systems from a second tier for general IT services and a different tier for end-user environments. This would restrict credential reuse across tiers and limits how and where domain admins can log in, but allows additional controls to make higher tiers more difficult to compromise while minimizing the blast radius if lower tiers are compromised first. Some organizations are also starting to build clean room recovery environments for this exact reason. Places where identity, networking, and admin tooling are separated into a non-trusted domain from the compromised one. Now let's talk about destructive malware and ransomware. In many high-impact incidents today, the attacker's goal isn't just encryption, it's operational disruption, and in some cases, outright destruction. We saw this several years ago with NotPetya, where the malware used stolen domain credentials and automated tools to move laterally and wipe systems, not just exfiltrate and encrypt their data. Recovery in that case wasn't about decrypting files, it was about re-imaging thousands of systems and rebuilding from scratch. Maersk, the shipping company, famously rebuilt their global AD infrastructure from a single surviving domain controller in the country of Ghana. It worked, but only because of luck, and that's not a plan anyone wants to rely on. We're seeing a slow return in the destructive direction, deploying fileless malware, targeting firmware, or corrupting backup catalogs. In those scenarios, even having a valid backup set isn't enough. The real question becomes, can you rebuild key systems and services from a clean slate without relying on compromised automation, script, or credentials? That's especially challenging with on-prem systems. Unlike cloud-native apps that can often be redeployed from infrastructure as code templates, many legacy systems require hands-on work to rebuild. And if their installation media, configs, or license keys live on the same domain that's now offline, that slows everything down. And those worst case recovery expectations that you set with the executive team and board may now mean weeks or more of recovery time. So here's what it comes down to. We need to separate identity recovery from system rebuild planning and make sure both can happen independently of any compromised environment. Start by identifying which systems are tightly coupled to Active Directory or domain authenticated services. Map out which of those are still on-prem and ask, if domain trust disappeared tomorrow, how would we rebuild this system? Do we have clean credentials, a known good and updated configuration, and a safe place to stage recovery? Then take a parallel look at destructive attack scenarios. Can we fully re-image these systems without relying on the tools that may have been wiped or tampered with? Are images, patches, and config guides up to date? Are there systems that would be nearly impossible to rebuild quickly? And if so, what would we need in place now to make that possible later? Backups need to be accessible without depending on domain trust, and rebuild plans need to assume identity may not be there to help. These aren't just disaster recovery approaches, they're business resilience necessities. Because at the end of the day, the next major ransomware wave may not just lock you out, it may burn the house down. When that happens, what matters isn't just how fast you detect the fire, it's how well you've stocked the tools to rebuild. The good news, this is all solvable. Recovery doesn't need to be perfect, but it does need to be decoupled, at least for your most material business processes. Answer these questions with confidence, you're in a much better position than most. If not, now is the right time to start filling in the gaps before that first real test comes. And if you need help sorting out a realistic disaster recovery plan that can both help your team to prepare and also prepares your team to be unprepared during black swan extreme cyber incidents, shoot me an email. I can help. Good hunting.